these are the ones that came in the suitcase. Yeah. Yeah. You know, look at that. At that time, people wear bell bottom. It's not my clothes, my sister's. But she say, these are the good thing. If I don't have money, I can sell them. Something like that. So it's pretty good. Yeah.
Have you worn it since?
This, no. I never. They never. Yeah, it make me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is like something I made in college. They asked us to make a self-portrait, and it kind of went against the stereotypes of what people would automatically think of me. It was like as an oppressed person, but for me it was like, not really. So yeah, that was my first self-portrait I ever did in college. And I just wanted to show that I was not necessarily what, people thought of me when they first see me.
Are those still the same words you would use to describe yourself?
I say, yeah, not much has changed. It would probably actually a lot stronger now. I've really leaned into it.
I came as a refugee, not a boat person, but one of the last phase of refugee that get fortunately enough to get on a plane from Teng airport to go to Clark Air Base in the Philippines. And right after that, they bombed the airport and people were not able to escape by plane. The airport was not, it was one of the busiest ones in the world, being the Vietnam War era. I remember in the morning, Coca-Cola, a bottle of Coca-Cola was about 100 piastres, which is very expensive. And then at noon, it was about 500. In the afternoon, it was 1,000 or something. And after 2, 3 o'clock, we can buy with our Vietnamese money. So I had 20-something thousand piastres. People just throw their money on the ground at the airport. And people walk on the money, and it was like you walk on paper. Just a couple hours earlier, it was so valuable. We hide it and all that, and now we walk on it. And as a 20-year-old, I looked at that and said, wow, this is war.
I was born in Taiwan in 1965. When we emigrated to the United States, my 2 siblings were older than I was. I was only 4. And I remember coming to this country, our first port of entry was actually California. We visited our cousins, our uncle, who was my dad's younger brother. And I remember my first impression of the US was this very bizarre, mix of people who didn't look like me. My uncle was really into his television and these great productions, these musical productions, on TV. And I remember he said, you've got to see this artist. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone with darker skin before. And he said his favorite group was like Gladys Knight and the Pips. And we were thinking, who are these Pips? And out came Gladys Knight singing with these 3 men as, the Pips, performing. And it was just this incredible, I don't know if it was a revelation, but it was just like this, wow, this is a different world that we're about to move to.
I know I'm Asian. I'm a person of Asian descent. I don't look all the way one thing or the other. So I don't really feel like, because we live in Texas and there's a huge and beautiful Hispanic community and culture here, a lot of times I was just kind of washed into that group, and they were like, oh, you're not Mexican? And I'm like, I'm not Mexican, I'm Filipino and Palestinian. They're like, what? I think a lot of it was that they just kind of assumed I was part of the Hispanic community. So when I started going to a Filipino church, I started seeing myself as growing more into my Asian culture, my Asian background. And when I started seeing myself being embraced by that Asian culture more, I started hanging around more Asian friends and eating more Asian food, because Filipino food is fabulous, but it's not typically like, I mean, it's kind of a fusion food because we're a fusion culture. So I would eat Vietnamese food, I would eat Korean food, Laos food, Thai food. So it was just kind of growing into that. I started seeing myself as more Asian, and as I was affiliating myself with more Asian culture and friends, then I felt more at home. But the weird part was I didn't look the same as them. So then again, I was an outsider in that community visually. Like I didn't look like my friends. So, and when I was growing up, that was hard. You kind of want to find your community, find your look, find your friends, find your safe space. And I feel like I think I might have been always looking for that until I got older.
Oh, my identities and their intersections are definitely a very interesting thing for me, because I knew that I was queer by the time that I was 4. I was very, very aware of the fact that I was just a little fruity from a very young age. And so I was like, okay, this will be interesting, being queer and Asian. Let's see how that goes. Then I got to middle school and I was like, am I having a gender crisis? Yes. And so then I was like, maybe I don't like the idea of being a girl or being a boy. I just want to be me. And then that was pretty accurate. And so I was like, okay, non-binary, bisexual, Asian. Then I got to college, and then it was like first generation college student, low income. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening here? And I feel like my identities have all mixed and mingled in a very interesting way, because I feel like a lot of times people say, don't let these things define you. But I think at the same time, for me, they do define me. And they define me in a very powerful way. And I don't see it as a negative thing. I don't see it as a hindrance or a hardship. I see it as something that has made me who I am. And I'm very grateful for every kind of experience and facet of my life that I have because of the various identities that I hold, because they all mix together to make this very interesting kind of singular life experience that, in a way, I feel like has prepared me to become more empathetic and open to kind of the diversity of our world, because I understand that in myself, there are so many diverse things that can coexist peacefully. Why can't that be the same outside?
My identity is more visible as a Muslim. People can't tell right away that I'm Indian. Surprisingly, people get surprised when you tell them I'm Indian. I think there's a lot of misconceptions, or I would say ignorance, regarding the fact that there are Muslims in India. And so when I say, oh, I'm Indian, but they're like, so you're Hindu? I'm like, no, I'm Muslim. Like, then how are you Indian? And so they can never seem to connect that. That people always had difficulty. I think it's gotten better somewhat, but when I was younger, they could never grasp the fact that a Muslim was Indian. They always assumed, oh, then you're Hindu. And I think in the broader concept, especially when I was younger, it never appeared like I was Asian American, because Indians weren't necessarily seen as Asian. They were always like South Asian or Indian itself, but like never seen the broader concept of Asian American. I think that's changed over the years, but definitely was not the case when I was younger. So yeah, I think that my identity as a Muslim played a larger role in the post 9/11 America than my identity as an Indian did.
Every early morning, I line up to get processed, to go to the main U.S. instead of in an island. And I remember my dad told me that I cannot leave because I was a woman, a single woman. I would live from one refugee camp with the tent to another refugee camp. He predicted it. I didn't believe him, but then I was at the refugee camp. I have to find someone who sponsor me out of the refugee camp so I won't be a burden to the U.S. society. the sponsor would come, and lots of men sponsor. I remember 3. The first one wanted to find a girlfriend, and he promised me he would teach me skiing and swimming in the summer, skiing in the winter, and all that. I said, that is so nice, but I don't want to learn all those things. I want to go to college, but I dare not say anything. I said, no, I'm waiting for my family. And another lady who came. There are others, but they won't look at a single girl. There's a lady who wants to find a live-in maid. That she said she had several children. If I was a teacher, it would be perfect. I will live in her home. She will give me 3 meals and all that, and never talk about salary or anything. So I didn't want to go with her. I said, wait for my family. And there was several others just passed me. One guy came. You know, this is several days in a row that I was waiting. One guy came and say, oh, I want to marry you. I really want to marry you. I thought with myself, I don't make it across the ocean all the way here to get married. No. So I say, no, I'm waiting for my family. Finally, there is a missionary who has a family, and her husband is a teacher, and she had a daughter who is from Tijuana, Mexico. She had a daughter from Korea, and she had her own biological daughter and 3 sons. And she said that I will be her Vietnamese daughter if I want to join them. Of course, I want a family. It will be an international family with a daughter from Korea, a daughter from Mexico. Wow, I follow her. And that is how I got out of the refugee camp.
You know, your experience is dictated by the context of your life, right? I was completely unaware, moving, you know, as a 4-year-old and being in California. I can't compare to that experience. But I do remember that when we were first in New Jersey, in a very predominantly Scottish area, we were the outliers. And I think I suffered my first round of traumas, being chased, being name called, being tripped, and being threatened to be beaten up. So, and that's as like a 5-6-year-old. Mm-hmm. And that was traumatic. You know, there was always this fear as that you were going to be persecuted by other children. But that was really my first experience of fear, for just being something that I had no control over being.
So growing up, there was always that stigma of Asian kids, which again, like growing up, I felt I was Filipino, but like the Asian kids, that, stigma was more like connected to any like Vietnamese kids or Chinese kids or Korean kids, the kids that look traditionally Asian. Like Filipinos, we always look a little bit of a fusion, like Spanish, a little Chinese, a little Hispanic, just mixed together. So I didn't feel so much of that stigma of, oh, those Asian kids are so smart, those Asian kids are so quiet, those Asian kids do what they're supposed to do. I mean, I thought that, even though I was an Asian kid. I was like, oh gosh, those kids are so quiet, those kids are so smart. I wasn't quiet and I wasn't that smart. It was like creative, but that's how it felt. I felt like I was looking at the Asian kids, not being part of the Asian kids. And then when my strong memory of going home crying, I remember in elementary school, it was during Desert Storm. My name is Shadia, and the kids in class would run by me in the gym doing laps and say, Shadia Arabia, and just make me cry. My mom's like, why are you crying? That's nothing. That doesn't mean anything. But at that time, there was a war. So that was just, I felt like they were kind of making me feel like an enemy or making fun of me. And it's an uncomfortable feeling as a kid. I couldn't even imagine my mom being like, she was probably furious, but That was a memory I remember, and it kind of pushed me a little bit away from getting close to that culture again. Like, just because I was like trying to distance myself, that's not me, I'm not an enemy. Isn't that funny how we, even then, even when I was little, saw that as the not friendly side. They're not the good guys. It's really weird to me.
I think the number one thing that happened for me that really changed my life was the Atlanta spa shootings and hearing about those. Because not only did that impact me personally, but it was also kind of the launching point for my activism career as of recently. And so I remember when the spa shootings happened, I was at school, and that was devastating. We were all so emotionally disturbed, and we didn't know what to do. And we didn't have an outlet for where we could express our emotions and feel and grieve as a community. And SMU was not providing us the place to do so. And it was the Asian Council Executive Board and we had partnered together to launch and host a vigil on campus to create an open forum and dialogue about what exactly was happening to the AAPI community, both on campus and across the country, and the increase of hate crimes due to COVID-19, but also the sexualization of Asian femme people and how we are taken for granted and absolutely mangled into this unrecognizable caricature of what Asian femme people are. And so we hosted that vigil, and that was kind of just a rallying point for the community of how we could support each other and stand up in this immense time of hate and darkness. But it also happened to be the thing that put me on the map in terms of my activism work and really spark that next 2 years that I had on campus, to where it allowed me to help make progressive moves forward for racial equality on campus for all people of color, regardless of whether or not they were Asian, Black, Latino, Indigenous, or anything in between.
If you're an American, 9/11 is like the modern day issue where everything changed apparently in how people perceive the brown community, and that doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or not. It's like if you're brown, you're looked at with suspicion, and so that played a huge role in how I saw myself in the world and how I felt others perceived me and how I interacted with people. It was always self-conscious. I always tried to do better. I think that's what a lot of Asian Americans or even Muslims tend to do, is they try to be even a better American because they feel like they need to lean into this that no, I'm like the model American, like we do everything from civic organizing to community service, to we're like the best neighbor you can find because we don't want to play into the suspicion that people have about us. And so it was always trying to do the best I can, and I think it's the pressure that really impacts you, that you don't realize that you're trying to be like a perfectionist, and you don't have to be. You forget how to relax because you're constantly on your self-conscious about yourself and how you're perceived. And so that 9/11 had a huge impact on how I grew up in the United States, and I'm sure that applies to millions of others in the United States. It's not a singular story.
After a month or so, I got employed as a nurse's aide for the graveyard shift. I didn't have transportation. All I have is a bicycle, which I usually walk. Because of the hill in Southern California, I don't have the energy to climb up the hill with my bike. And when it come down, I was scared because my bicycle didn't have a brake. One day it really rained. Of course, I never sleep because I don't have an alarm clock. So I wake up every hour to look at the clock so I won't be late to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. I have to be there at 6:30 to punch my time clock, my time card. So no alarm clock. I dare not ask Mrs. Miller for it because she opposed that I went out to work. I should just depend on God's provision. But being a teacher back home and independence, I just cannot sit there and depend or have welfare or anything like that. I have to work. I remember that morning it rang, and I had a trash bag as my raincoat. I had 2 plastic bags that contain bread that we would recycle now, but at that time people just throw it away. I had 2 of those long bag to cover those are my gloves, those were my gloves. And then I have another plastic bag to cover myself, some plastic bag to cover my shoes, and walk. And I remember rain drop, and my tears and rain kind of mingled together. And I thought, why am I here? You know, why am I here? If I die in Vietnam, at least my family can claim my body. At least I see my family. What am I doing here? And why am I earning $2 an hour and doing enemas? It was really humiliating. But then I thought to myself, you know, I'm relieving somebody. I'm doing service, and I'm contributing. I'm okay. I'm not bringing shame to my parents. And I remember many nights I came home and I saw the full moon, and I will be talking to the moon and say, oh, my parents, my family will see the same moon, and the moon will give messages to them. I remember all those things. And, you know, I think that the war and the hardship and being not being fit because my dad is Chinese and mom is Chinese Vietnamese, and she doesn't speak Chinese, and we belong to the Vietnamese community, we belong to the Chinese community, but we don't belong to any of them. So all those things had taught me how to overcome, how to look at people's eyes and see if their eyes, their look is a look of disdain or a look of adore and appreciation. I learned all that.
Well, I am a woman-owned, minority-owned business. I'll have to say that it's been, you know, a little bit challenging because there are these notions that when they look at you, there's an immediate assumption that you either don't speak the language very well, and especially in food service, right? So you're doing a restaurant, and most immigrants who come, many of them are not native speakers of English. And being a woman-owned, being in the South, has you know, it's been a good mild surprise for people, I guess. I remember I come from a very entrepreneurial family, right? And just the backstory is, you know, I grew up with my mom owning she bought a restaurant because when my father, you know, moved us to the United States, and my mother came kicking and screaming. She did not want to come. She was very comfortable where she was at. He came, and we had, you know, 9 lovely years, and he ended up dying 9 years after we moved. And so my mother was left with 2 kids in college, and 1, me, in middle school or junior high school. And she had to find a way to start making money. So she took my dad's life insurance, and she was going to invest in a business. And so she took his life insurance money, and local friends said, well, you know, there's a little fast food restaurant that you could, you know, buy into. You don't really need to know how to cook. There's already a short order. It was like a hamburger place. You could just invest in that, and you could just run it. And my mother, being extremely entrepreneurial, she was like, okay, you know, so because she bought into that restaurant, I kind of grew up watching her run it, and I ended up helping her, you know, and that was my experience as in high school. I really thought that that was not the life for me, you know. But she did it not because she was thinking, oh, I want to work my tail off, and you know, but she had to work because she had 2 kids in college, and she had to pay for college tuition, and she had me. And the funny thing is, when I look at it, you know, I kind of repeated history.
In 2020, right around this time of year, actually, there was an article that came out about me in the Dallas Morning News at the very tail end of my freshman year of me being SMU's resident homeless student. And that was kind of what put me on the map in the first place at SMU. So because of COVID-19, my family became homeless and started living in a motel. My parents are divorced, and so they had to move back in together. Then 2 weeks after them moving back in together, I get the notice that SMU is kicking all of its students out. And so we are scrambling. I'm moving into the motel. We now have 2 dogs, 2 divorced parents, and a college-age kid that are all going, what in the world is going on? And then the world shuts down. And somehow, I think a reporter or an intern from the Dallas Morning News who actually attended SMU got a hold of my name and kind of heard my story, because at first she was writing an article about housing insecurity for college students, but ended up, after she heard my story, they pivoted and turned it into a profile. And that story was written in around March, and it came out in May as I was taking a statistics final on Zoom in a motel. And 1 minute I'm trying to do my stats final, and next thing you know, my computer's getting blown up, my phone's getting blown up. I don't even know what to do. I'm trying to finish this exam before getting my life absolutely rocked. And it was like, no. There's like news reporters coming to where we live at the motel. And it was absolute chaos. And it kind of branded me in this way of putting me on the map, yes, but for all the wrong reasons. And the first ever thing that I had said to me back on campus, not even 2 months after that article came out, I was literally going to get mail, and it was during the summer. But I walked into the mailroom and I see the guy who runs the mailroom, and he goes, "Oh my God, I know you. You're the homeless kid." And he like stopped himself in his tracks. Like he looked shocked at what he said. And he just turned around and then turned back to me, and he was like, "I'm so sorry." And I was like, I totally get it. Like that was something that just happened to come out of your mouth, but I know that that's how I'm going to be seen from here on out if I don't make a change, and if I don't do something that'll override that narrative that has been written about me that may be true, but is only one facet of my life. And so that was kind of the thing that spurred me to get out on campus and to make noise and to not be afraid of it, because I had gone to SMU terrified of my identities and how they would marginalize me on a campus filled with rich, white people who come from immense privilege and only care about themselves half the time. And so I used that moment to be like, I refuse to stay silent. I refuse to let my narrative be written by other people in a way that I can't control. And I refuse to let that narrative get away from me when I have every opportunity to take that story and make it into something bigger than myself and turn it into a jumping off point for doing good. And not just good for me and for my family, but for people who might not even know us and who will come after us, who go to SMU or, you know, maybe even the Dallas community, and learning more about the impact of that situation.
Now I feel like I am as much and more deeply rooted to my Palestinian connection, and seeing so many alignments between the two cultures too is so interesting, because I don't know a lot of people like me. There are a lot of half Filipino Palestinian people, as I found out, which is crazy. But there's a lot of alignment in between both cultures that Filipinos wouldn't see and Palestinians wouldn't see. They don't see each other as aligned. They see each other as strangers, the cultures. But even in textiles, even in the weaving of the kufiyah and how they're done on these beautiful looms with these natural cotton threads, it's the same in the Philippines. My cousin is a weaver. This is her fabric that I'm wearing. And I watch those weavers weave them on the bamboo looms with those natural cotton threads. And to me, like seeing the images from one side of the world to the other, and they're the same images, the same hands, the same generations of weavers. It's incredible to me. You can see when you look at the keffiyeh, you can still see the threads just running through that are so fine and that are natural. And it's really similar to also the threads that I'm wearing on this shirt. I mean, they feel similar. And I was so lucky to grow up with those two parts of me being separate and then being able to see how they can fuse together. It makes me feel more comfortable being myself, knowing that they're aligned in that way. And it's generational. It's not like you can just train somebody. They were like, it's the families that do it. So you can't just move a loom. You can't just like go, let me go buy one. It's the same loom that's been in the same home by the same family. So it's such a richness of both cultures.
Growing up, we didn't have much representation of Asian American, whether that's Indians or whether that's East Asians or South. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, there was not much representation of Asian Americans in media or anywhere to, unless you're talking about academia or like engineering or doctor. But growing up, I think the first Asian Americans I started seeing was YouTubers that was Asian background, you know, whether it was like Kev Jumba or Ryan Higa or, you know, all of the comedians that were on YouTube, and that kind of gave us representation that we lacked growing up because that was never something we had. And so we in the community felt like we had some like space that we had created for ourselves that I think the older generation did not have the privilege of. So we were like in that little bubble of the Asian American community, we thought, you know, we're American now. This is it. This is what, you know, this is where we belong as well. But as you go into the world and you experience, and then it's not much of a difference besides that space that we created for ourselves in the wider concept of the United States. It was still very much missing. We were still discriminated against in many different ways, whether the way people interacted with us or what they expected of us. And I think that got a lot worse post-COVID and better. And it's a really weird mesh because it was also like the whole of how K-pop came into play, and everyone is like into Asian dramas or like, you know, K-pop or Chinese dramas or like even Indian movies. Like it just came into like fore, like where everyone is enjoying what Asia is putting out. But Asian Americans were somehow being more discriminated against at the same time. And it's a really weird reality, and it's hard to understand, and like, how is this making sense? But I think it's very similar to how African Americans have always said that people enjoy their culture, they enjoy what, you know, they've created, but they just don't necessarily appreciate the people in themselves. And I think that applies very well to our community as well, is that they love our culture, they love our food, you know, they love eating tteokbokki and sushi or chicken tikka or whatever, but they don't necessarily appreciate the people behind all of that.
I'm not here to open up a restaurant to sell a lot of food, to make a lot of money, and that's that. I wanted it to be sort of like an experience. I opened up a restaurant that was a little atypical of a Chinese restaurant. I opened up a restaurant where it's sort of an homage to my mom. My mom's from northern China. I grew up eating her homemade dumplings. I wanted it to be a dumpling spot. I wanted dumplings to be normalized. I want the dumpling to be like a taco. You're here in Texas. Everybody gets up and everybody has a breakfast taco. Why don't we have a dumpling? And it's no longer in the category of Chinese and foreign. I want this world to embrace Asian things, not as Asian things. It's a thing. I want kids, and it's happening because I see kids were teeny little babies who come into the restaurant. And when they want to celebrate something, they want to have dumplings. I mean, how heartwarming is that? Food has no boundaries.
I have always just been very open to different Asian cultures and kind of learning about them. I feel like one thing that Asian people tend to do, regardless of whether we are East, West, Southeast, Southwest, whatever, is we all sometimes put ourselves in these boxes a little too tightly. And we cling to our cultures in ways that can sometimes be harmful to our communities. And I think that with my upbringing, I was really allowed to have this idea of cultural fluidity and understanding that my cultural background and my values weren't just specific to my background, but to the people around me and our sense of community. And so for me, I really had this very interesting way of growing up to where it was like, yeah, I knew about my own culture quite a bit, but I knew about others a lot more. And I had this really nice way of building bridges and finding these meaningful connections in my culture and other people's, while also being able to preserve the sanctity of our own culture and move forward with kind of a different perspective and value of the ethics and family kind of bonds that we had built over the years. And I think that also really changed a lot when I got to college too. Like, trust me, going to college was the number one thing that really shook my whole world up a million times over. Like, I just was exposed to so much more in that kind of community because all Asians at SMU knew that we were kind of this small little group and we had to kind of cling to whatever we had. And so for me, it was like, even though I was opening my eyes to even more of the various facets of Asian culture, it was still like that same root communal bond that I had discovered at a young age was still very apparent.
I grew as a teacher. I excel, and my peer noticed and nominated me to represent the school, and I made it to represent the school district as 2002 Elementary Teacher of the Year for Plano ISD. I made a name for myself, and with that, with my visibility, I was able to help the school district open up and hire more Asian American teachers that speak with an accent like me. And I was able to have a voice for my community. I was able to bring awareness that there are people that is different than you, but actually there's so many similarities. We all are here to contribute. We all are here to try to make this world a better place. And I try. And I felt, in a sense, Teacher of the Year is an honor, but the honor is to be able to help an immigrant parents that knew nothing. I share with this mother, they don't speak English, and I told them there is the library. There is a library. You don't have to pay anything. There is the park. There is, I remember, there might be some community that speak the same language with you. I try to help them out. And I felt those are my highest honor, that I felt that I contribute.
As a Muslim Indian girl, I was always told to be, quiet, never speak out when you're not being spoken to. You wouldn't imagine a girl from my village like speaking in public, speaking out her thoughts and opinions on stuff. But I came to realize pretty early on as a child that I had a lot of opinions and that wasn't going to stay hidden. I got involved in a lot of things at a pretty early age. I think my first intro into activism had to do with animals, not even humans, but just like, I love animals. And growing up in California, you go to any amusement park or you go to SeaWorld and you see like ocean, like whales and dolphins on shows. And at first I was like, oh my God, I love this. And then I would like go into Google deep dive and I was like, oh, I don't love this. And so Facebook was just like, in its beginning stages, and I got into this little hole where, internet rabbit hole where it's like, uh-oh, SeaWorld is not that pretty. And so that was my first foray into activism. It's like, nah, they belong in the wild. They don't belong in a swimming pool performing for humans. And so that's how I kind of got into the whole space of activism. And I was like, this applies to a lot of things. And because I grew up in a very diverse community, and then I went to a private school where a lot of the population was Arab, and I started getting introduced to Palestine and that issue. And so I started boycotting and being active in that space like since 5th grade, 6th grade. And so it came into very early into my life. And I guess I just kind of played out into what I became as an adult and I didn't realize that while I was growing up that this is the path I was taking, because, I was always very into fashion and food. And so like, I thought I would always do something regarding that. But then I started college, and then it's just like, oh, it doesn't look like that's what I'm going to be doing, and I majored in human rights with a focus on women's studies and Asian studies. And so that's just been life since. And so taking part in whether it's any women's rights issues, whether that has to do with, education, sexual violence. My research solely on sexual violence laws in India, as well as in faith communities in the United States, whether it's Palestine, whether it's the issue of Indian Muslims, whether it's human rights issues across the world, whether it's Black Lives Matter. I think it's just being your basic duty as a human being, or even to the country that you are part of. Your basic civic duty is taking care of people around you. And if I can't stand for the people in my community, what is the point?
So my grandmother raised her children alone because my grandfather was a businessman, and he was often not at home. And my grandmother was, she had bound feet. People of a certain class, women of a certain class, had their feet bound. And it prevented them from doing anything like grubby work, like, labor and doing that. So when the dynasty ended and the Republic of China, there was turmoil, civil war, they said, unbind your feet. So she ended up with sort of malformed feet, but having to deal with raising her children, and she had to survive a tremendous amount of hardship. Our whole family history has been women that had suffered these things, either it's these events in their lives, like, husband not being around, political turmoil, and being shipped off and being alone and having to be self-sufficient and independent. And then my mother emigrating to the United States, and then her husband dies. I think my mother was not even 50 when her husband died. So she had to sort of pick everything up. And so what I'd learned out of all this was you can't wait for someone to take care of you. You've got to be on your own, okay? And you've got to be prepared for anything. Growing up again in a very matriarchal chain, it was just this thing that I just became, to become a warrior. And I went to this all-women's college where they told you, you're gonna do it because you can be anything you want. And so when I graduated from Wellesley, my peers and I were just like, we're gonna go out there and we're just gonna, just, scream, roar, be warriors, okay? And I think that all became the fabric of who I am. These were experiences that kind of helped me shape my formative years to be kind of like who I was, and then that's the springboard. That's how I found out who I really could be.
I think it's important for future generations and our kids now to grow up embracing their culture. It's something that a lot of people my age, a lot of my friends that are my age from different cultures, it wasn't a priority. They really wanted their kids, the parents that came here from all different backgrounds, all different journeys to try to get here, they wanted their kids to just fit in. They were like, don't learn this language, learn English. make sure you study so you can be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a nurse. They were just really pushing that American dream narrative onto their kids, and it's like a blanket they would cover their kids with, their hopes and dreams. But if you cover your kids with this blanket of hopes and dreams, it has an impact in that they grow up not wanting to embrace their parents' culture. It's going away. I think it's important to try to find balance between living the dream, being successful, however that is to you, not being a doctor or a lawyer. Obviously that's what every parent's dream of success looks like for their children when they come from different backgrounds where they have to really work hard every day. But also being successful in that you have happiness and peace and balance, and that you're connected to your family, that you don't leave them behind, and that you carry your culture with you everywhere you go. I think that's successful. When you meet somebody like I've done lately, and I'm like, I'm Palestinian, and they're like, oh wow, you're Palestinian? Because I would be like the first Palestinian person they would meet or could talk to or ask hard questions without feeling judged or side-eyed, you know? So I think, to me, that's something you could aim for, to be a good representation of who your parents were.
Who inspires you?
Oh, my mom and my grandma, for sure. Like, when I say that they are kick-ass Asian women, I mean it. Like, I don't think I would have any of my spunk or my fire or my passion if it weren't for those two. They take every challenge that has ever been put in front of them and just absolutely demolish it. It's like it's not even there. They'll just act like life is all good, and they're like, yeah, is that a problem? No, it's not. Don't worry about it. It's all good. And so I think I look at them and their passion for life and their absolutely unyielding personalities. And I just learned so much from them, because on top of that, you can see a strong woman, but to see a strong Asian woman that refuses to bow down to anybody, especially Asian men, is something that is so incredibly rare for me to ever see. And I'm so used to seeing a lot of Asian women tend to choose peace and stay silent for the sake of the family or for, their husbands. But my mom and my grandma were the very people who taught me that other people's peace is not worth my silence. And that if there is something worth fighting for, you fight like hell for it. And you make that change and you go after what you want. Because in the end, the person that you are stuck with for the rest of your own life is the person that you look in the mirror at every single day. And if you can't make that person proud, then how can you go to bed at night knowing that you are stuck with them forever? And so looking at them too and how they've lived their lives has really taught me, like, I will not be anybody's peace. I will bring peace in the way that our communities get justice and our future generations have a better life to live than what we've got. But I will not rest until that is achieved, or at least steps toward that are achieved.